So I'd like to introduce you now to our next speaker. I'd like you to welcome Helen Nys. Helen is the Assistant Director General of Policy and Service Design with the Department of Communities. Welcome.
Thank you, Bonya, and thank you for that really inspiring information from our previous speaker about the Peer Connect. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this country and to acknowledge their elders past, present, including those in the room, Karina, and their future elders and leaders. So thanks for the welcome, Bonya. And as Bonya said, my position is as Assistant Director General, Policy and Service Design in the Department of Communities, which is a bit of a mouthful, and I've only been in that position for 5 weeks, so also a bit of a steep learning curve. Prior to that, I was working in the Disability Services Commission, where I've been in local operation and also in their policy division. So the topic this morning that we were asked to talk about was the Department of Communities and its role in supporting peer-to-peer networks and self-advocacy. So I guess in order to get to that position, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Department of Communities. So the Department of Communities was created in 2017, when the government initiated, new government came in and wanted to initiate public sector reform, and particularly with an intention and a desire to make government work better together, bring departments together, have greater integration between the services that are provided to people, and very much with a direction and a desire that government connected and delivered services that were connected to communities and delivered outcomes that communities wanted. So the Department of Communities was created through the merging of the Department of Child Protection, Department of Housing, the Department of Communities and Local Government, Disability Services Commission, the Regional Reform Unit, and some of the policy elements from the Aboriginal Development Unit within the Department of Indigenous Affairs. So a whole range of people from substantially different departments. The department was officially formed 1st of July last year, and it's taken us almost a year really to bed down and start to consider our service delivery models. And from the 1st of July 18, we will be moving to a different structure for delivering services, which is particularly focused around regional teams and regional and local decision making. So you won't have separate departments anymore, but there will be departments that provide service delivery and integrated service delivery to people living in those communities. So the vision of the department is very much focused around people, place and home. When we went out there and when we spoke to communities and when we spoke to people, they're the things that are important to everybody. It doesn't matter what part of our service people connect to. It doesn't really matter where they come from, where they live. Those are the 3 things that are consistently important to everybody. They're also the 3 things that are consistently important to our staff and to the organisations that we connect with. So that's, I guess, our outer image. It's a kind of the department's value basis. So there's a circle around everything we do, that everything we do should be connected to supporting people, home and place. And some of the activities that we want to support in order to deliver that vision are: we want to support strong families and kin to provide safe and nurturing environments for people to live in and for children to grow in. We want to have safe children to enable a good start to their lives. We want to work with empowered people, with valued roles and fulfilling lives. We want our work to create inclusive and accessible communities that enable social, economic and cultural prosperity for the people living there. And we want to work to create a place that's called home that provides a secure foundation for life for people. So when I look across this is the structure of our department. So a bit of bureaucratic, but sometimes it just helps to know who sits where. So the new department has a structure that has, first of all, our commercial operations, which is essentially the business side of the Department of Housing. And the assistant director there is Greg Cash. Then we have commissioning and sector engagement, which is part of the business that contracts with service providers, but also does the work around connecting and understanding where gaps in service provision is and procuring and commissioning for new service delivery models. And the person in charge of that is Marion Hales McDonald, who many of you will know as having worked in the Disability Services Commission for some time. Corporate operations, which is, the business, the HR, the IT, the buildings, with an Assistant Director General, Paul White. Marion Hales McDonald appears twice because she is also still the Assistant Director General of Disability Services, and that's because there's a recognition that the Disability Services Commission will probably continue for another 2 years as it transitions services over to the National Disability Insurance Agency. Policy and Service Design, which is where I sit, the Office of the Director General, and then our service delivery arms are metropolitan communities, where the Assistant Director is Jackie Tang, and regional and remote communities with the Assistant Director, Rachel Green. And then we have another small central unit that works alongside my own, which is strategy and transformation, and they are leading on some of the across-government initiatives that we're working on, including the integrated service delivery model. So how are we actually going to develop regional teams? What will they look like? What will they do? How will we support them? And they're also leading on some of the cross-government initiatives in the youth justice and early years space. When you look back to the list of services that we provide, and I talked about people, place and home, I think one of the stark things for me about disability services and people with disability is they, of all the groups that we support, are actually connected to all the other agendas we deliver. So whether you're talking about safe homes, child protection systems, the public sector housing, domestic violence, whatever area we're working in, people with disability are actually represented across all those areas. So one of my challenges to our staff is to remember that in all our service delivery models, they need to think about how their service delivery is accessible and how the decisions they make impact on all people, including people with disability. Excuse me. The priority areas for disability services, and in that I'm talking about the residual department that we're expecting to continue for another 2 years, are to steward the transition of WA services to the NDIS. Thank you, Bronya. To identify those services which are not transitioning into the NDIS and where we're going to place them into the broader government. So where do they sit? What is the state government going to continue to fund, to provide, and how will they deliver those services? And to provide services for people with disability and to facilitate their full citizenship and their participation in the communities that they live in. So just looking at what some of those priorities mean and what they actually mean in practice. So currently there's about 7,000 plus people that are connected to the WA NDIS, and over the next 2 years they will be supported to transfer over to the nationally delivered NDIS, and that transfer will actually be complete by December 2018. So sorry, not 2 years, it's actually about 6 months. So far, I think we've just got under 100 people who've transferred over. Integrating the services, the Department of Communities is an amazing opportunity to actually relook at what we do, how we do it, to co-design, to connect, to engage with people and communities around what that service delivery model looks like. So we really haven't decided on what residual services will be, where they sit and how we'll deliver them. That's a piece of work that we need to undertake over the next 12 to 18 months, and that's something that we very much want to do in conjunction with people with disability and their communities. We do need to work to get an understanding of what West Australian communities need, co-designing the evidence and the place-based response that makes sense on the ground. So the department has a very strong commitment to place-based, local delivered services and local decision-making, so that if you're living in the Pilbara, the decision-making about service delivery models in your area is made by people who work and live in the Pilbara. And we're very committed to working in partnership with people with disability, with communities, with other government departments, with the business sector, and with the not-for-profit sector. So this isn't something that we will be doing on our own. It's about doing it with anybody else that wants to join us. Some of the activities in the disability services space that the Department of Communities is actively supporting at the moment. The Changing Places Network, and you'll have seen there's been multiple media releases around the Changing Places Network, and that's an initiative that the government has been very keen to promote and to expand. And you know, it seems like a pretty basic human right that actually, if you need to be able to go out in the community, that you've got access to facilities. So in some ways, it's pretty appalling that it's taken us so long to get to where we are. But I think it is also, you know, demonstrates the commitment of government to make communities accessible with some very constructive construction that people actually need in order to be able to access their communities. So it's a program that we hope will grow and grow. And one of the really pleasing things is that increasingly local government and the private sector is coming on board, and we are having some of the very big private developers saying to us, how do we get a Changing Places space in this facility? What does it look like? What do we need to consider? The Department of Communities is also leading on some of the Metronet precincts, so that's the housing development around some of the new Metronet stations, and again that's a great opportunity for us because we can talk to them about making those stations and the precincts around them accessible, not just in terms of people being able to catch the trains, but actually the other facilities that you need so that people are able to get out and access their community. There's a quality and safeguarding framework which we're working on with the Commonwealth Government, and some of you will know that alongside the National Disability Insurance Agency there will be a National Quality Safeguarding Commission, and they will have responsibility for quality and safeguarding and standards for service delivery across Australia. And the Minister for Disability Services has instigated a round table in relation to particularly employment for people with disabilities, and he has had two roundtable discussions with people with disability who are currently employed in the public and private sector about what works, what's not working, what we need to do more of, and he's also met with a number of the large employment groups to really work with them and persuade them to increase their employment of people with disability, and he's also leading the charge in the public sector to increase the employment of people with disability. And lastly, there is work undergoing on the development of a WA disability statement, which would be a piece of work that sits along and underside the National Disability Framework, so which is a national document that all jurisdictions signed up to. And the WA statement is really about how do we make this work in practice? What does it actually mean on the ground in Western Australia? That statement and that piece of work will be led by our policy team, but actually we're very keen that it's embedded in the regional teams. So it's not just a piece of paper, it's actually something that guides what we do in practice. What does this actually mean for people living and working on the ground? So information linkages and capacity building, it's a phrase that the National Disability Insurance Scheme brought to our awareness. It's the funding stream that they created to support people with disability and support communities to make them more accessible and more inclusive for people with disability. So it's a very important part of the whole National Disability Insurance Scheme. Some people go so far as to say if ILC doesn't work, then the rest of it won't work, because an inclusive community and an accessible community is about more than just individual plans. So ILC, it supports communities and mainstream services to include, support and involve people with disability. There's a whole series of ILC grants that are issued by the Commonwealth Government in the various states, and there have been 2 ILC funding streams within Western Australia so far. In March 2018, $3.6 million in ILC funding was shared amongst 27 organisations, and they ran a range of initiatives, including a number of the peer-to-peer support networks were supported through ILC grants. And there has been a further grant process this year, which is very close to being announced, so there will be some further funding made available, and I'm expecting that the Minister will be able to make some media releases about that in the near future. The third area that the department is supporting is advocacy. Disability Services is in the process of developing some options for the Minister to consider for a state-funded systemic advocacy program. So some of you might know that the state has funded individual advocacy, but which is about, an organisation that you can go to when you need support around a specific issue that's causing some difficulty in your life. But systemic advocacy is around supporting organisations to lobby and government and communities and the private sector on issues that affect people with disability as a whole. So it's not just about one person, but this is something that affects all of us, and we want to talk to you about how you can do it better. In the consultation that's taken place around developing this program, the members of the public that we've spoken to have highlighted a range of issues, and they've contributed to the overall evidence that we've used for the paper for government. And we're putting that paper together, and we will be putting it up to the Minister for consideration in July this year, and then talking to him about the next steps in developing the process from there. So back to peer-to-peer support and self-advocacy, and how do we see that they're supported in the Department of Communities? I think the first part is to think about, we would see them as being really central to our connection with communities in the regional place-based services. So the regional directors for each team, part of what I'll be working with them is on statewide engagement strategies, but also local engagement strategies. And we would see peer-to-peer peer-to-peer networks and connect forums as being one of the means that the regional management team and the regional directors can actually connect to the people that live in their communities. ILC will continue to be a big means of supporting peer-to-peer networks. Peer-to-peer support is clearly capacity building, which is something that the ILC grants are intended to support, and we would expect that there'll be future grant rounds going as the years roll out. There's also a whole range of state-based grants. One of the interesting things for me in moving to my new job, where it's policy across all the former departments, is there's a whole range of other grant processes that go on, which sitting over in Disability Services Commission, I wasn't even aware about. And I think that perhaps some of the disability networks and some of the provider organisations and the peer bodies didn't necessarily know about them all, because they tended to have been, there's seniors grants, there's youth grants, there's women's interest grants, there's a greening communities grant. So there's a whole range of other streams of funding which government issues on a fairly regular basis that I'm really keen get connected to the disability networks as well, so people know about these processes and can think about whether or not they want to apply for them as well. Because, as I said, people with disability are in all areas of life. So they might be interested in a youth grant, and they might be interested in a women's interest grant, and they might even be interested in a green gardening grant. And I don't think that we've necessarily publicised those grant processes as widely as government could have in the past. And lastly, support for peer-to-peer networks should be available through people's individual NDIS plans, because they are about capacity building. And so if people developing your plans are thinking about what are the purchases, the supports that you want to purchase that will be developing your individual capacity, where peer-to-peer support networks are, whether they're going to move to fee-based services or whether there'll be particular programs that peer-to-peer support networks choose to run, those are services that people could look to have built into their individual plans to sustain the network. And so that's the end of my 15 minutes. Thank you, Bonya.
Thanks, Helen. That's fantastic. That's I think for me, one of the things you raised there is do we need to get out of the disability space. There's lots of opportunities for us as community members to be able to access supports from a wide range of places, services, communities, and I think that that's probably an area that we might start to have to pay some more attention to into the future. So it's great to know that government's behind, the state government's behind, the whole of the community with disability being part of that. That's where we want to be. We don't want to be separate. We want to be included in whatever's happening in the community for everyone. So it's great for us to be able to think about how we're going to be in that the model that Helen was talking about. So really pleased to hear that there is funding coming through somewhere, there's grants coming through, and that you can also look towards developing a goal of being supported by a peer support network in your individual plan in the NDIS. And I'm sure after the break, Sam Payer will be able to speak with you a little bit about that.